The snow fell in thick, silent curtains across the Montana Territory as Hannah Barrett stepped off the stagecoach in Kingfisher, her threadbare coat doing little against the biting December wind of 1884. She had come west with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a letter from the Women's Educational Relief Society promising temporary teaching work in this isolated ranching community. And the moment her boots touched the frozen ground, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Samuel Oakley watched from across the rutted Main Street, his broad shoulders dusted white with fresh powder as he loaded supplies onto his wagon. He had not expected to see anyone foolish enough to arrive in Kingfisher this late in the season, much less a woman traveling alone. She looked lost and cold, her dark hair escaping from beneath a hat that had seen better days, and something in the vulnerable set of her shoulders made him cross the street before he could think better of it. "Madam, you look like you could use some directions," he said, touching the brim of his hat. Hannah turned, startled by the deep voice, and found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the very mountains surrounding this valley. He had eyes the color of storm clouds and a face weathered by sun and wind, with lines that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. She judged him to be somewhere near 30, perhaps a few years older than her own 23 years. "I'm looking for Mrs. Patterson," she said, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. "I'm the new schoolteacher." Samuel's expression shifted, something like concern crossing his features. "You're the teacher they sent for, in December." "I go where I'm needed," Hannah replied, lifting her chin despite the cold seeping into her bones. "The letter said the previous teacher had to leave unexpectedly." "That's one way of putting it," Samuel muttered. "She married the banker and moved to Helena 3 months ago. The children haven't had proper lessons since September." He studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "Mrs. Patterson's house is at the end of this street, but she's visiting her sister in Bozeman for the holidays. Won't be back until after New Year's." Hannah felt her heart sink. "But the letter said I could board with her." "The letter probably should have mentioned she leaves every winter," Samuel said gently. "This town isn't exactly organized when it comes to communication." He saw the flash of panic she tried to hide and found himself offering before he could reconsider. "My ranch is about 5 miles north. I've got a spare room that was my sister's before she married. You're welcome to it until Mrs. Patterson returns. It's warm and dry, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will appreciate having another woman around." Every practical instinct Hannah possessed told her to decline. She knew nothing about this man except that he was tall, solid, and apparently kind enough to offer shelter to a stranger. But the alternative was standing in the freezing street with nowhere to go and night approaching fast. "That's very generous," she said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition if I'm offering," Samuel said. "And honestly, if I leave you here, Mrs. Chen will have my hide when she finds out. She's got strong opinions about hospitality." He gestured toward his loaded wagon. "I'm heading back now if you'd like a ride. We can leave word at the general store about where you'll be staying." Hannah looked around at the small, snow-covered town with its handful of buildings huddled against the cold. The light was already fading from the sky, and she could feel the temperature dropping with each passing minute. Making a choice that felt both reckless and necessary, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Oakley. Samuel Oakley, and you are Hannah Barrett. Well, Miss Barrett, let's get you somewhere warm before we both freeze solid." The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour through increasingly heavy snow. Samuel kept the horses at a steady pace, clearly familiar with every turn of the narrow road, even as it disappeared beneath fresh powder. Hannah huddled in her coat, grateful for the thick blanket Samuel had wrapped around her shoulders without asking. How long have you been teaching?" Samuel asked, breaking the silence. 3 years, Hannah replied. "I taught at a girls' school in Philadelphia until it closed last summer. The economy hasn't been kind to private institutions." "Philadelphia," Samuel repeated, something thoughtful in his tone. "That's a long way from Montana territory." "I wanted a change," Hannah said simply, which was true enough. She did not add that Philadelphia held too many painful memories of a failed engagement to a man who had decided a schoolteacher was not quite refined enough for his family's expectations. Coming west had felt like the only way to start fresh, even if it meant venturing into unknown territory. "You'll certainly get a change here," Samuel said with a slight smile. "Kingfisher isn't much more than a wide spot in the road. Most folks are ranchers or work for ranchers. We've got maybe 40 families spread across the valley, and the nearest real town is a day's ride south. And the children, how many will I be teaching? About 20, ranging from 6 to 15. They're good kids, mostly. A bit wild from 3 months without structure, but they'll settle once you establish the rules." He glanced at her, his expression serious. "I should tell you, though, that spring comes late here. Real late. Some years we get snow into May." Hannah felt a flutter of something she could not quite name. "The letter said I was needed through the spring term. I assume that means I'll stay until May or June." "That would be the usual way of things," Samuel agreed, and Hannah thought she heard an odd note in his voice, but she attributed it to the wind. The ranch appeared through the swirling snow like something from a dream. The main house was larger than Hannah had expected, built of solid logs with smoke curling from 2 chimneys. A barn and several outbuildings formed a protective semicircle, and even through the storm, she could see that everything was well maintained and prosperous. "You have a beautiful home," she said as Samuel helped her down from the wagon. "Thank you. My father built the original cabin 30 years ago. I've added on over the years." He grabbed her bag and led her toward the house. "Watch your step. The porch can be slippery." The door opened before they reached it, revealing a small, efficient-looking Chinese woman who immediately launched into rapid speech. "Mr. Samuel, you are late. I was worried the storm caught you in town. And who is this poor frozen girl, Mrs. Chen? This is Miss Barrett, the new schoolteacher. She needs a place to stay until Mrs. Patterson gets back from Bozeman." Samuel stomped snow from his boots. "I told her she could use Sarah's old room." Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes softened immediately. Of course. Come in, Miss Barrett." "You look half frozen. I have soup on the stove and fresh bread." "Mr. Samuel, go tend the horses before they freeze. I will take care of our guest." Before Hannah could protest, she was swept into the warm house and divested of her wet coat and hat. The interior was surprisingly refined, with polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and bookcases lining one wall. A fire roared in a large stone fireplace, and the smell of cooking food made Hannah's stomach clench with sudden hunger. "You sit here by the fire, Mrs. Chen ordered, guiding Hannah to a cushioned chair. "I will bring you hot soup." "When did you last eat?" "This morning in Helena," Hannah admitted. Mrs. Chen made a disapproving sound and hurried toward what Hannah assumed was the kitchen. Left alone, Hannah took in her surroundings more carefully. The books on the shelves were an eclectic mix, everything from agricultural texts to poetry. Photographs in simple frames showed a younger Samuel with an older couple who must have been his parents, and a pretty blonde woman who was likely the sister he had mentioned. There was a quality of solid comfort to the room, a sense of a life built with care and intention. Samuel returned as Mrs. Chen was pressing a bowl of thick vegetable soup into Hannah's hands. He had changed into dry clothes and his hair was damp from melting snow. "Mrs. Chen taking good care of you?" he asked. She's wonderful, Hannah said sincerely. The soup was delicious, rich and warming, and she had to resist the urge to gulp it down. I have been telling Mr. Samuel for 2 years that he needs a wife, Mrs. Chen announced, making both Hannah and Samuel shift uncomfortably. A big house like this should have children running through it, but does he listen? No. He works all day and reads his books at night and says he is too busy for courting. Mrs. Chen, Samuel said with the patience of someone who had heard this speech many times before, Miss Barrett doesn't need to hear about my personal life. I am just saying, a woman would not be foolish to consider such a man. Good land, good character reads poetry. Mrs. Chen gave Hannah a meaningful look. You remember this, Miss Barrett. Hannah felt her cheeks warm and concentrated very hard on her soup. Samuel ran a hand over his face, clearly mortified, which somehow made the whole situation less awkward. I apologize, he said. Mrs. Chen has very strong opinions about my unmarried state. Someone must speak sense, Mrs. Chen said, unrepentant. Now, Miss Barrett, when you finish eating, I will show you to your room. You must be exhausted from your journey. The room Mrs. Chen led her to was small but cheerful, with a window overlooking what Hannah imagined would be a spectacular view in daylight, a comfortable bed piled with quilts, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. Someone had already lit a small stove in the corner, and the space was blissfully warm. Thank you, Hannah said, touched by the care that had been taken. This is lovely. Mr. Samuel's sister, she lived here until she married last year, Mrs. Chen explained. She was a teacher too before she met her husband. You will be comfortable here, I think. And do not worry about Mr. Samuel. He is a good man, very respectful. You are safe in this house. I appreciate you telling me, Hannah said, realizing the older woman had picked up on her earlier nervousness about staying with strangers. Get some rest now. Tomorrow we will talk about the school and the children. There is much to prepare. Mrs. Chen patted her arm and left, closing the door softly behind her. Hannah changed into her nightgown and crawled beneath the heavy quilts, her body finally beginning to thaw. Through the walls, she could hear the muffled sounds of Samuel and Mrs. Chen talking in another part of the house, their voices low and companionable. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall, but here in this unexpected refuge, Hannah felt safer than she had in months. She fell asleep wondering what the morning would bring and trying not to think about the rancher with storm-colored eyes, who had shown her unexpected kindness. Hannah woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through her window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly. The room was still warm, someone having stoked the stove during the night, and when she looked out the window, she gasped. The ranch spread before her in a pristine blanket of white, the mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. The sky was an impossible blue, the kind of color she had never seen back east, and the sun made the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds. It was breathtakingly beautiful. She dressed quickly in her best day dress, a simple brown wool that was practical if not fashionable, and pinned her hair into a neat bun. When she emerged from her room, she found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, which was large and well equipped with a massive cast iron stove and windows that let in the morning light. Good morning, Miss Barrett. Did you sleep well? Very well, thank you. And please call me Hannah. Then you must call me May, the older woman said with a smile. Sit, sit. Breakfast is almost ready. Mr. Samuel is already in the barn, but he will come in soon. Hannah sat at the large wooden table and accepted a cup of coffee. Have you been with Mr. Oakley long? 5 years now. I came west with my husband after the railroad was finished. He died in an accident 2 years ago. May's face grew sad. Mr. Samuel, he let me stay even though he could not really afford a housekeeper then. He said everyone deserves a home. He is like that, always helping when people need it. That was very kind of him. Kind, yes, but also lonely. May set a plate of bacon and eggs before Hannah. He works too much, thinks too much. Since his parents died and his sister married, he is here alone. A man needs a family. Hannah decided to change the subject before May could launch into another speech about Samuel's marital prospects. Tell me about the school. What should I expect? May was explaining the logistics. The building was small but solid. The previous teacher had left some materials but not many when the door opened and Samuel entered with a gust of cold air. He stomped his boots and hung up his coat, then turned to them with a smile that transformed his serious face. "Good morning, Miss Barrett. I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you. And please, my name is Hannah." "Then you should call me Samuel." He grabbed a cup of coffee and joined them at the table, accepting a plate from May. "I was thinking, if you're up to it, we could ride into town this morning. I need to check on a few things, and you should probably see the schoolhouse before classes start next week." "I'd appreciate that," Hannah said. "When does the term begin?" "Usually the Monday after New Year's, so that gives you about a week to prepare. Most families understand the teacher needed time to arrive and settle in." He paused, something cautious in his expression. "I should probably mention that I'm on the school board, along with the banker and the preacher. We're the ones who handle hiring and salaries and such." "I see," Hannah said, wondering if she should feel awkward about staying with someone who was technically her employer. But Samuel's manner was easy and professional, and she decided not to make an issue of it. They set out an hour later, the wagon newly equipped with runners that turned it into a sleigh. The journey that had been treacherous and dark the night before was now beautiful, the road following a creek lined with frost-covered willows. Samuel pointed out landmarks as they went, the valley opening before them like a snow-covered bowl rimmed with mountains. "That's the Miller Ranch to the east," he said, gesturing. "They've got 4 children who'll be in your class, good family. And over there, that's the Hendersons' place. They're newer to the valley, only been here 3 years, but they're hard workers." Hannah listened, trying to memorize names and places. "How did you end up here? Were you born in Montana, Wyoming, actually?" "My father was a trapper first, then decided he wanted to settle down and raise cattle. He staked a claim here when I was 5. My mother was a schoolteacher from Ohio, which is probably why education matters to me. She taught me and Sarah until we were old enough to go to the territorial school in Helena." His voice grew warm with memory. "She died 7 years ago. Fever. My father followed her 2 years later. I think he just couldn't bear being without her." "I'm sorry," Hannah said softly. "Thank you. They had a good life together, though. Nearly 35 years married and still holding hands when they thought no one was looking." He glanced at her. "That's the kind of marriage I'd want if I ever found the right woman. The kind where you're still friends at the end." Hannah felt an odd flutter in her chest at his words, but kept her voice neutral. "That's a lovely way to think about it." The town was busier than it had been the evening before, with ranch families taking advantage of the clear weather to gather supplies. Samuel helped Hannah down from the sleigh and led her to a small building at the edge of the main street. The schoolhouse was simple but well built, with a wood stove, rows of desks in various states of repair, and a blackboard that had seen better days. "It's not fancy," Samuel admitted, "but it's solid. I repaired the roof last summer and the stove draws well." Hannah walked around the room, her practiced eye taking inventory. She would need chalk, more books, paper, and slates for the younger children. The previous teacher had left a few primers and a worn atlas, but not much else. Still, she had worked with less. "It'll do nicely," she said. I'll need to make a list of supplies. Make your list and give it to me, Samuel said. The school has a small budget, and I can probably supplement anything that's missing. There's a good general store in Helena that stocks educational materials. They spent an hour in the schoolhouse, Samuel helping her take inventory while Hannah made notes in a small book she produced from her pocket. He was surprisingly knowledgeable about teaching supplies, which he attributed to his mother's influence. She always said a good education was the difference between surviving and thriving, he explained. I still have some of her teaching books if you'd like to borrow them. I'd like that very much, Hannah said, charmed by the idea of this rancher who had inherited his mother's respect for learning. They were leaving the schoolhouse when a woman's voice called out across the street. Samuel Oakley, is that you? A blonde woman in an expensive traveling suit was hurrying toward them, her face alight with curiosity. Behind her came a tall man in a banker's suit, looking considerably less enthusiastic about the encounter. Clara, Samuel said, his tone polite but notably cooler than it had been. I heard you were in town visiting. Just for a few days. Mother insisted I come for the holidays. Clara's blue eyes fixed on Hannah with undisguised interest. And who is this? This is Miss Hannah Barrett, the new schoolteacher. Hannah, this is Mrs. Clara Stevens and her husband, Robert. Robert's the president of the bank and on the school board with me. Pleased to meet you, Hannah said, though something in Clara's assessing gaze made her uncomfortable. A schoolteacher from back east, Clara said, as if Hannah had announced she was from the moon. How very ambitious of you to come all this way. And where are you staying? I heard Mrs. Patterson went to Bozeman. Miss Barrett is staying at my ranch until Mrs. Patterson returns, Samuel said evenly. Clara's eyes widened with barely concealed delight at this gossip. Is she really? How very convenient and generous of you, Samuel. It's what anyone would do, Samuel replied, a slight edge to his voice now. Robert Stevens cleared his throat. We should probably discuss the school budget at some point, Samuel, if you have time this week. I can make time. Stop by tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. They made their excuses and continued on, but Hannah could feel Clara's gaze following them. Once they were out of earshot, she ventured a question. Was she someone important to you? Samuel let out a long breath. We were engaged 3 years ago. She broke it off when she met Robert and realized he had more money and social connections. Married him 6 months later and moved to Helena. I'm sorry, that must have been difficult. It was at the time, Samuel admitted, but looking back I realize we weren't well suited. She wanted things I couldn't give her. A life in a city, fancy parties, the kind of society that doesn't exist in a place like Kingfisher. She would have been miserable as a rancher's wife. And you would have been miserable giving up ranching, Hannah guessed. Exactly. He smiled at her, genuine warmth in his expression. I'm done apologizing for loving this land and this life. If that makes me unsuitable for certain women, then those aren't the women for me. Hannah found herself smiling back, thinking about her own failed engagement to a man who had wanted her to give up teaching and become the kind of wife who sat in parlors and discussed fashion. I think we may have had similar experiences with unsuitable matches. Then perhaps we're both better off out here, making our own way, Samuel said, and something in the moment felt significant, though Hannah could not have said exactly why. They spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies, and Samuel introduced her to what seemed like half the valley's population. Everyone was friendly, if curious about the new teacher, and Hannah began to feel less like a stranger and more like someone who might belong. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Hannah spent her mornings preparing lessons and organizing the schoolhouse, which Samuel drove her to and from each day. Afternoons, she spent reading in the ranch house or helping May with various tasks. though the older woman insisted she was a guest and should not work too hard. Evenings, after supper, Samuel would often read by the fire while Hannah corrected her lesson plans, and they would talk about books or the valley or their respective pasts. Hannah learned that Samuel was 31 and had never seriously considered leaving Montana, even when cattle prices crashed and many ranchers went under. He had diversified, keeping sheep as well as cattle, and had slowly built his operation into one of the most successful in the region. He loved the land with a quiet passion that showed in how he spoke about the mountains, the seasons, the way the light changed throughout the day. Samuel learned that Hannah had grown up in a modest home in Philadelphia, the daughter of a postal clerk and a seamstress. She had won a scholarship to a teaching college and had planned to marry her fellow teacher until he had been offered a position at a prestigious boys' school, one that required him to be unmarried and unencumbered. He had broken their engagement with apologies and justifications, and Hannah had realized she was well rid of a man who valued ambition over love. "You miss the city?" Samuel asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Hannah considered the question. "I miss some things. The theaters, the libraries, the sense of being connected to the wider world. But I don't miss the crowds or the dirt or the feeling that I was always being measured against someone else's standards." She looked up from her book. "It's peaceful here. I like being able to see the stars at night." "Wait until you see them in summer," Samuel said. "On a clear night, it looks like someone spilled diamonds across the sky, makes you feel small and significant all at once." "Will there be opportunities for summer teaching?" Hannah asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Samuel's expression shifted, something careful in his eyes. "The term usually runs through June, like I mentioned. After that, most families need their children home to help with summer work, but teachers are welcome to stay if they want. Some do, some move on to other positions." "I see," Hannah said, wondering why the thought of leaving in 6 months created a hollow feeling in her chest. She had been here less than 2 weeks. It was ridiculous to already be thinking about staying longer. But as December faded into the new year and teaching began, Hannah found herself settling into Kingfisher in ways she had not anticipated. The children were indeed wild at first, testing her boundaries and patience, but she was a skilled teacher and knew how to be firm without being harsh. Within a week, she had them organized into groups by age and ability, and within 2 weeks, they were making genuine progress. Samuel stopped by the school occasionally, ostensibly to check on the building, but really, Hannah suspected, to see how she was managing. She would look up from helping a student with arithmetic to find him watching from the doorway, a slight smile on his face, and something warm would bloom in her chest. They had begun taking evening walks when the weather permitted, bundled in coats and scarves as they followed the paths around the ranch. Samuel showed her where the creek would run swift and clear come spring, where wildflowers would carpet the meadows, where elk came down from the high country. He painted pictures with his words until Hannah could almost see the valley transformed by warmth and green growth. "You make it sound beautiful," she said one evening in late January as they walked beneath a sky brilliant with stars. "It is beautiful," Samuel replied. "Spring here is like nowhere else. Everything comes alive all at once. The whole valley turns green practically overnight, and the mountains are covered in wildflowers. Baby animals everywhere, birds singing, the air so clean and sweet you could drink it." "You really love it," Hannah observed. "I do." He was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "I keep thinking how much I'd like to show it to you. Spring, I mean, the valley in spring." Hannah's heart began to beat faster. "I'll only be here until spring. That's what I told the school board." "I know." Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. But spring doesn't have to come early. Samuel, what are you saying? He seemed to be choosing his words with care. I'm saying that this winter has been unusually mild, barely any snow since you arrived. The roads have stayed mostly clear. If we get a few more good storms, if the cold holds, spring could be delayed. Hannah stared at him, realization dawning. Are you telling me you want winter to last longer? I'm saying I'm not in any hurry for it to end. He took a step closer, and Hannah could see the vulnerability in his face. You said you'd stay until spring, so maybe if spring takes its time coming, you'd have reason to stay longer too. Samuel. Her voice came out softer than she intended. You can't control the weather. No, but I can choose when to mention that the roads are getting bad, or that there's a storm coming, or that it's not safe to travel yet. He ran a hand through his hair, looking almost embarrassed. I know it's selfish. I know you might have other plans, other places to go. But I haven't felt this way about anyone since Clara, and even then, it wasn't quite like this. Hannah's breath caught. What do you mean, felt this way? I mean that I think about you constantly, Samuel admitted. I find excuses to come by the school just to see you teaching. I listen for your voice in the house. I want to show you everything about this place that I love. And the thought of you leaving in spring makes me want to do something foolish like pray for eternal winter. They stood in the frozen night, snow crunching beneath their feet, and Hannah felt everything inside her shift and settle into a new configuration. She had been falling for this man for weeks, she realized, had been charmed by his kindness and his passion and the way he saw beauty in the world. But she had told herself it was impossible, that she was leaving, that there was no point in hoping for more. Now he stood before her, asking her without quite asking if she might stay, and Hannah felt the careful walls around her heart begin to crumble. I wouldn't call it foolish, she said quietly, praying for more time. Samuel's eyes searched her face. No, no, she took a breath, committing to honesty. I've been dreading spring for weeks now. Every time I think about leaving, about going back east or finding another position somewhere else, I feel sick inside. But I didn't think I had any other choice. You always have choices, Samuel said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted, and took her hand in his gloved one. You could choose to stay through summer. You could choose to teach another year. You could choose to see what might happen between us if we had more time. I barely know you, Hannah protested, but her hand tightened around his. Then let's fix that. Stay, Hannah. Give us a chance to really know each other. Let me court you properly the way you deserve. And if spring comes and you decide you want to leave, I'll help you go with no hard feelings. But if spring takes a while to arrive, well, that just gives us more time. Hannah laughed, the sound escaping before she could stop it. You're talking about manipulating the seasons to court me. I prefer to think of it as taking advantage of Montana's unpredictable weather patterns, Samuel said with a grin. We really could get snow through May. It's not entirely a manipulation, but you'd encourage it. I would passionately encourage it, he admitted. And I'd do everything in my power to convince you that staying is the right choice. Hannah looked at him, this strong, honest man who had shown her nothing but kindness, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. All right, she said. Court me, and we'll see what happens. Samuel's face lit up with a joy so pure it made Hannah's chest ache. Really, really. But Samuel, I need you to understand something. I won't be courted just to become someone's wife and give up teaching. I love teaching. It's important to me. I know that, Samuel said seriously. And I wouldn't ask you to give it up. In fact, I think the Valley needs a good permanent teacher more than anything. You're the best we've had in years. The children are learning, the parents are happy. Why would I want you to stop? Most men see teaching and marriage as incompatible, Hannah pointed out. Then most men are fools, Samuel replied. My mother taught until the year before she died, and my father supported her completely. He said watching her with the children made him love her more. I feel the same watching you teach. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, moved by his understanding. You really mean that? Every word. He squeezed her hand. Now, let's get back before we freeze solid and May comes looking for us. We can start this courting properly tomorrow. I'll take you on a proper outing if you'd like. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when May saw them, her face split into the widest smile Hannah had yet seen. The older woman said nothing, but her eyes sparkled with satisfaction as she served them hot cocoa. True to his word, Samuel began courting Hannah with a determination that was both flattering and overwhelming. He brought her small gifts, books from his collection that he thought she would enjoy, a warm scarf May had helped him pick out, wildflowers from the general store's greenhouse that had traveled all the way from Denver. He took her on sleigh rides through the valley, introducing her properly to all the ranch families, and everyone welcomed her with increasing warmth. He also, Hannah noticed with amusement, became extremely interested in weather prediction. Any hint of clouds on the horizon was cause for discussion. Any drop in temperature was noted with satisfaction. When a major storm blew through in mid-February, dropping 2 feet of snow and making the roads impassable for a week, Samuel looked positively pleased. The roads will be treacherous for weeks after this, he announced at breakfast, trying and failing to look concerned. No one should think about traveling anywhere for a while. May rolled her eyes. Mr. Samuel, you are fooling no one. I don't know what you mean, Samuel said with exaggerated innocence. I'm simply concerned about safety. You are concerned about Miss Hannah leaving, May said bluntly, but you need not worry so much. She is not going anywhere. Hannah blushed. May, you can't know that. I know, May said with certainty. I see how you look at each other. I have seen many kinds of love in my life, and this is the real kind, the kind that lasts. After May left the room, Samuel looked at Hannah with an expression caught between hope and uncertainty. Is she right? Are you not going anywhere? Hannah set down her coffee cup and met his eyes. Samuel, we've only been courting a few weeks, I know, and I don't want to rush you, but I also don't want to pretend I'm not serious about this. About us. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. I'm falling in love with you, Hannah. Maybe I already have fallen, and I think maybe you feel something too. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. They had been careful, both of them, not to push too fast or assume too much, but the truth was undeniable. She had fallen in love with Samuel Oakley, with his quiet strength and his passion and his absolute acceptance of who she was. She loved the way he treated May with respect, the way he cared for his animals, the way he could quote poetry and discuss philosophy, and then turn around and shoe a horse. She loved his hands and his voice and the way he smiled when he saw her coming. I feel something, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. More than something, I feel everything. Samuel stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. He held her carefully as if she were precious, and Hannah buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather and pine. Then stay, he murmured into her hair. Not just until spring. Stay for good. Marry me, Hannah. We'll make this work however you need it to work. You can teach as long as you want. We'll fill this house with books and children and love, and we'll build a life together. Hannah pulled back to look up at him. Samuel, that's a proposal. It is, he agreed, his gray eyes serious and warm. I know it's fast, I know it's probably too soon. But I also know what I want, and what I want is you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here. I want to hear about your days teaching and tell you about the ranch. I want to show you the valley in spring and summer and fall and every winter for the rest of our lives. I want to grow old with you the way my parents grew old together, still holding hands when no one is looking." Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks, but they were happy tears, the kind that came with overwhelming joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you. I want all of those things too." Samuel kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper as Hannah kissed him back with all the feeling she had been holding inside. It was a kiss that tasted of promise and hope and the beginning of forever. When they finally pulled apart, Samuel was smiling wider than Hannah had ever seen. "We should probably tell May before she starts planning the wedding without us." As if summoned, May appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her own face and a huge smile visible. "Finally! I told Mr. Samuel months ago that he would meet his match, and here you are. We have much to plan." The next weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. News of their engagement spread through the valley with astonishing speed, and the ranch families rallied around them with enthusiasm. The women descended on the ranch to help Hannah plan, bringing fabric for a dress, family recipes for the wedding feast, and enough advice to make her head spin. Samuel was patient through all of it, enduring teasing from the other ranchers with good humor and making sure Hannah never felt overwhelmed. They decided on a March wedding, early enough that winter was still clearly present, but late enough to give them time to properly prepare. Clara Stevens made one more appearance, arriving at the ranch uninvited one February afternoon while Samuel was out checking cattle. She found Hannah in the schoolhouse after classes, clearly having timed her visit deliberately. "Miss Barrett," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Or should I say the future Mrs. Oakley?" "Mrs. Stevens," Hannah replied calmly. "What can I do for you?" "I just wanted to offer my congratulations," Clara said, walking around the schoolroom and touching various objects as if assessing their worth. "It's quite a catch, isn't it? All that land, the successful ranch. You must be very pleased with yourself." Hannah felt a flash of anger but kept her voice level. "I'm marrying Samuel because I love him, not because of his property." "Of course you are," Clara said, her tone suggesting she believed nothing of the sort. "And I'm sure he's told you that he's in love with you. He told me that too once, before he realized I needed more than he could offer." "I'm sorry your marriage to Mr. Stevens hasn't made you happy," Hannah said quietly, "but that has nothing to do with Samuel and me." Clara's composure cracked slightly. "Robert is perfectly fine. He's ambitious and successful, and we have a lovely home in Helena." "But you're not happy," Hannah said, seeing it clearly now. "And you're wondering if you made a mistake choosing money and status over someone who truly loved you." "How dare you?" Clara began, but Hannah interrupted. "I'm not trying to be cruel, Mrs. Stevens, but I think you came here hoping to make me doubt Samuel or doubt myself, and I won't do either. I know what I'm choosing and why. If you made a different choice and regret it, that's something you'll have to make peace with yourself." Clara stared at her for a long moment, then her shoulders sagged. "He was good to me, Samuel, kind and patient and genuine. I thought I wanted sophistication and excitement, but mostly I'm lonely. Robert works constantly, and when he's home, we have nothing to talk about." She looked at Hannah with something like envy. "Don't make my mistake. Don't let him go." "I won't," Hannah said softly. "I promise you that." After Clara left, Hannah sat at her desk and thought about the different paths lives could take, the choices that seemed small at the time but changed everything. She thought about her own near miss with a man who had valued ambition over love, and how different her life might have been if she had married him. Coming to Montana had seemed like an escape, but it had really been a journey toward something better, toward a life that fit her in ways she had never imagined. The wedding took place on a clear, cold morning in mid-March, with the mountains standing sentinel in the distance, and the whole valley turned out to celebrate. Hannah wore a dress of cream wool, simple but beautiful, that the valley women had helped her sew. Samuel wore his best suit and looked so handsome and happy that Hannah felt her eyes well with tears. The ceremony was held in the schoolhouse, the only building large enough to hold everyone, and the local preacher officiated with warmth and humor. When Samuel took Hannah's hand and promised to love and cherish her for all his days, his voice was steady and sure. When Hannah promised the same, she meant every word with her whole heart. They exchanged simple gold bands, and when the preacher pronounced them married, Samuel kissed her with a tenderness that made the assembled crowd sigh with approval. The celebration that followed was joyful and raucous, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked during a quiet moment when they had escaped the crowd for a breath of air. Hannah smiled up at her husband, still marveling at the word. "I'm happier than I ever imagined I could be." "Good," Samuel said, pulling her close. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the room that had been Samuel's and was now theirs, and Hannah discovered that love could be both gentle and passionate, tender and all-consuming. Samuel was patient and attentive, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and Hannah gave herself to him with complete trust. Afterward, wrapped in his arms with the moonlight streaming through the windows, Hannah thought about the strange path that had led her here. She had come to Montana planning to stay only until spring, a temporary teacher in a temporary place, already thinking about her next position. But Samuel had made winter last as long as he could, using weather and circumstance and sheer determination to give them time. And in that time, they had fallen in love so completely that leaving had become impossible. "What are you thinking?" Samuel murmured, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I'm thinking about spring," Hannah said. "About how I said I'd only stay until spring and you made winter last." Samuel chuckled. "I may have mentioned road conditions more than strictly necessary." "You absolutely did," Hannah agreed, "but I'm glad you did. If you hadn't given us that time, I might have left. And then where would we be? Miserable and alone," Samuel said. "Me pining for the woman who got away, you teaching somewhere and wondering what might have been. Instead, I'm here, married to the most wonderful man I've ever met." Hannah tilted her face up to kiss him. "And I'm not going anywhere, Samuel Oakley. Spring can come whenever it wants now." "About that," Samuel said with a grin, "I heard from one of the other ranchers that we might be in for a late spring this year. He said he saw geese flying north later than usual, and that's always a sign that cold weather will linger." Hannah laughed and swatted his chest playfully. "You're incorrigible." "I prefer to think of myself as optimistic," Samuel replied, but his eyes were dancing with humor. "And maybe a little bit strategic. Can't blame a man for wanting to keep his bride all to himself for as long as possible." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, warm and safe and completely in love, true to Samuel's prediction, or perhaps to his continued hopeful weather observations. Spring came late that year. Snow continued to fall intermittently through April, and the temperature stayed cold enough that the valley remained locked in winter's embrace. The children complained about the continued cold weather, but Hannah secretly didn't mind. There was something magical about the extended winter, as if the world had conspired to give her and Samuel this gift of time. She continued teaching through it all, riding to the schoolhouse each morning with Samuel and throwing herself into her work with renewed passion. The children were thriving under her instruction, and several of the older students were now reading at levels that rivaled students back east. The school board voted unanimously to offer her a permanent position, which she accepted with joy. But as April faded into May, Even Montana's stubborn winter had to admit defeat. The snow began to melt in earnest, exposing brown earth that quickly turned green. The creek swelled with runoff and ran swift and loud. And one morning, Hannah woke to Samuel shaking her shoulder gently. "Come see," he said, his voice filled with excitement. She followed him to the window and caught her breath. The valley had transformed overnight. Green grass carpeted the meadows, and the mountains were painted with wildflowers in every color imaginable. Birds sang from every tree, and in the distance she could see deer grazing peacefully. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "You were right. Spring here is like nowhere else." "And you're here to see it," Samuel said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You stayed." "I stayed," Hannah agreed, leaning back against him. "Not because winter lasted, but because I fell in love. With you, with this valley, with the life we're building together." Over the next weeks, Samuel showed her everything he had promised. They rode through meadows so thick with wildflowers that their horses' legs disappeared in color. They watched elk calves take their first wobbly steps and listened to the creek's spring song. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains and making plans for their future. In June, Hannah finished the school term with a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. Every one of her students had made significant progress, and several parents had approached her privately to thank her for her dedication. The school board presented her with a new contract and a small raise, which Samuel celebrated by taking her to Helena for a weekend trip, their first time away from the ranch since the wedding. They explored the territorial capital hand in hand, visiting bookstores and theaters and enjoying the novelty of hotel life. But Hannah found herself missing the ranch, missing the quiet and the space and the sense of home. "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who preferred isolation to civilization," she admitted as they prepared to head back. "But I miss our valley." "It's in your blood now," Samuel said. "Montana has a way of doing that. It gets into you and you can't imagine being anywhere else." Back at the ranch, summer unfolded in a series of perfect days. Hannah tended a garden with May, learning to grow vegetables in the high altitude. She helped with some of the lighter ranch work, discovering she enjoyed the physical labor. And she spent long afternoons reading under the trees, planning lessons for the next school year and dreaming about the future. It was in late July that she realized she had not gotten her monthly courses. She was almost never irregular, and when a second month passed, she began to suspect what it might mean. She confided in May 1st, who immediately took charge with the kind of bustling efficiency that was her hallmark. "We will bring the doctor from town," May announced. "He will confirm what we already know. You are with child." The doctor came 2 days later and confirmed Hannah's pregnancy. She was due in late February or early March, he calculated, and everything looked healthy and normal. Hannah waited until that evening, until she and Samuel were alone on the porch watching the stars emerge, to tell him. "Samuel, I have some news," she began, suddenly nervous despite knowing he would be thrilled. "Good news or bad news?" he asked, turning to look at her with concern. "Good news." "The best news." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Samuel just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face split into the widest, most joyful smile Hannah had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully now as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he breathed. "Hannah, we're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Samuel said. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You've given me everything I ever wanted. A wife I love, a home filled with joy, and now a child. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I'm grateful for it every single day." They sat together under the stars, talking about names and nurseries and all the changes a baby would bring. Samuel was already making plans, converting the room next to theirs into a nursery, building a cradle, ensuring they had everything they would need. Hannah laughed at his enthusiasm but was touched by it too. He would be a wonderful father, she knew, patient and kind and full of love. The summer faded into fall, and Hannah began the new school year with a slight roundness to her belly that the Valley women noticed and celebrated. They showered her with advice and gifts, knitted blankets and tiny clothes and promises to help when the baby arrived. The Valley had accepted her completely, and Hannah realized she was no longer the outsider who had arrived on a winter stage. She was one of them now, a part of the community, someone with roots and connections and a future. As winter approached again, Hannah found herself thinking about the year that had passed. She had arrived in Kingfisher a stranger, cold and uncertain, and planning to leave as soon as possible. Samuel had given her shelter and then, slowly and surely, had given her everything else. His home had become her home. His dreams had become their dreams. And the love they had built together was stronger than she had ever imagined love could be. "You remember last winter?" she asked Samuel one evening in November as they sat by the fire. "When you were so determined to make it last as long as possible." "I remember," Samuel said with a smile. "I was terrified you'd leave before I had a chance to convince you to stay." "You did more than convince me," Hannah said. "You showed me what life could be. You showed me that I could have both love and purpose, that I didn't have to choose between being a wife and being a teacher. You gave me everything I wanted without ever asking me to give up who I was." "That's what love should do," Samuel said simply. "It should make you more yourself, not less." Hannah moved closer, settling against his side with his arm around her. The baby kicked, and Samuel's hand immediately went to her belly, his face lighting up with wonder. "Strong one," he said, "just like his mother." "Or her mother," Hannah corrected. "Or her mother," Samuel agreed. "Either way, they'll be loved beyond measure." The baby came on a snowy morning in late February, earlier than expected but healthy and perfect. The birth was long and difficult, but Samuel stayed by Hannah's side the whole time, holding her hand and giving her strength. When the doctor finally placed their son in Hannah's arms, she looked down at the tiny, red, perfect face and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He's beautiful," Samuel breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Hannah, he's perfect." They named him Thomas after Samuel's father, with the middle name James after Hannah's father. Little Tommy was colicky and demanding, keeping them up most nights and testing their patience, but neither of them minded. Samuel proved to be exactly the father Hannah had known he would be, gentle and patient, and completely smitten with his son. May was equally enchanted, taking over much of the baby's care and giving Hannah time to rest and recover. The Valley women visited constantly, bringing food and help and more gifts than one baby could possibly need. Hannah found herself part of a community of mothers, sharing stories and advice and the kind of friendship that came from shared experience. She returned to teaching in the fall, bringing Tommy with her. The schoolroom now had a cradle in the corner, and the children took turns helping to rock the baby when he fussed. It was unconventional, but the Valley families did not mind. They valued education and understood that their teacher was also a mother. Hannah managed to balance both roles with a grace she had not known she possessed. Years passed in a blur of joy and growth and change. Tommy grew into a bright, curious boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. When he was 3, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Samuel's sister, and 2 years after that, another son they called Matthew. The house that Samuel had once rattled around in alone was now filled with the noise and chaos and joy of children. Samuel expanded the ranch, building it into one of the most successful operations in Montana Territory, which became the state of Montana in 1889. Hannah continued teaching, becoming known throughout the region as one of the finest educators in the state. Several of her students went on to attend university, something almost unheard of for rural ranch children, and they credited her with changing their lives. The valley grew and changed too. More families arrived, drawn by the good land and the tight community. A proper church was built, and a larger general store, and eventually, a small hotel for travelers. Kingfisher would never be a city, but it became a real town, a place where people built lives and raised families and put down roots. Through it all, Samuel and Hannah's love remained the constant. They still took evening walks when they could, still sat by the fire reading together, still held hands when they thought no one was looking. They had arguments, as all couples do, about money and decisions and how to raise the children. But they always worked through them with respect and honesty, remembering the promises they had made to each other. On their 10th anniversary, Samuel took Hannah back to the schoolhouse where they had married. The children were with May for the evening, giving them a rare moment alone. They stood in the empty room, memories flooding back of that day when they had promised forever to each other. "You have any regrets?" Samuel asked quietly. "About staying, about giving up the possibility of returning east or teaching in a bigger city?" Hannah took his face in her hands, looking into eyes that were still the color of storm clouds, though now touched with lines from years of laughter and sun. "My only regret is that I almost left," she said. "I almost let fear and convention and other people's expectations make me miss out on this life with you. But you gave me time, Samuel. You made winter last long enough for me to realize I was already home." "Best decision I ever made," Samuel said, kissing her gently. "Manipulating the seasons to keep the woman I loved." Hannah laughed, the sound echoing in the empty schoolhouse. "You barely had to manipulate anything. Montana did most of the work for you." "Montana and a lot of hope and determination," Samuel agreed, "but I'd do it all again. I'd make winter last forever if that's what it took to keep you with me." "You don't have to," Hannah said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever. You're stuck with me, Samuel Oakley, through all the seasons of life." They stood in the schoolhouse, holding each other, and through the windows, they could see the valley they loved stretching out beneath the stars. It was winter again, snow falling softly on the ground, but neither of them minded the cold. They had learned that winter could be a gift, a time of drawing close and holding tight and discovering what really mattered. The years continued to pass in the way years do, bringing both joy and sorrow. Samuel's sister Sarah died giving birth to her 4th child, and Hannah held Samuel as he grieved for the sister he had loved. May passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, and they buried her in the valley she had called home, with a beautiful stone that Samuel carved himself. Hannah's parents both died within a year of each other, and though she had not seen them often, she mourned the loss and was grateful Samuel understood her grief. But there was joy too, so much joy. Tommy grew into a young man who loved ranching as much as his father did and took over more of the work, allowing Samuel to slow down as his body demanded. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, taking over the Kingfisher school when Hannah finally retired at 55. Matthew became a veterinarian, studying in Chicago but returning to Montana because, like his father before him, the land was in his blood. All 3 children married and brought their spouses to the ranch, and soon grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. Samuel and Hannah became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family. their table always full at holidays, their porch always crowded with people seeking advice or comfort or just company. On their 30th anniversary, the whole valley threw them a celebration. They stood together in the same schoolhouse where they had married, now surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, and listened as people spoke about the impact they had made. Former students talked about how Hannah had changed their lives. Other ranchers spoke of Samuel's integrity and generosity. Young couples credited them with being an example of what marriage could be when built on respect and love. When it was their turn to speak, Samuel stood with Hannah's hand in his hair now more silver than brown, and looked out at the assembled crowd. 30 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, a woman stepped off a stagecoach into a snowstorm and my life changed forever. She said she would only stay until spring, and I did everything in my power to make winter last as long as possible. I checked weather forecasts constantly, mentioned every cloud on the horizon, and took shameless advantage of Montana's unpredictable climate. Laughter rippled through the crowd and Samuel smiled. But the truth is, I didn't really need to do any of that, because Hannah saw something here in this valley and in me that was worth staying for. She chose this life, chose this community, chose me, and she has never once looked back. She has been my partner in every sense of the word, raising our children, building our home, and making this valley a better place with her presence. I am the luckiest man alive, and I thank God every day that winter was cold enough to give us the time to fall in love. Hannah stood then, tears streaming down her face, and added her own words. Samuel made winter last, but I would have stayed anyway. Because from the moment I met him, I knew I had found home. Not in a place, though I have come to love this valley more than anywhere else on earth, but in a person. In someone who saw me completely and loved what he saw. Who supported my dreams and helped me achieve them. Who has been my best friend and my partner and the love of my life for 30 years. She looked around at their family, at the community they had helped build. I came here thinking I was temporary, just passing through on my way to somewhere else. But Montana and Samuel taught me that sometimes the detours we take become the main road. Sometimes the temporary becomes permanent. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, winter lasts just long enough for you to realize you have found exactly where you belong. The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared around tables heavy with food. Samuel and Hannah danced together slowly, his arms strong around her despite his age, her head resting on his shoulder. 30 more years, he murmured into her hair. At least, Hannah replied, possibly forever. I can work with forever, Samuel said, and Hannah felt him smile against her temple. They lived to see their 40th anniversary, celebrating quietly at home with just family. Samuel's health had begun to fail, his heart growing weaker despite the doctor's best efforts. He tired easily now and spent most of his days in his favorite chair by the window, looking out at the valley he loved. Hannah sat with him every afternoon, reading aloud or simply holding his hand. They talked about their life together, remembering the early days, the first kiss, the wedding, the birth of each child. They talked about the ranch and the valley and all the ways things had changed and stayed the same. No regrets, Samuel said one afternoon in early spring. The snow was melting, and through the window they could see the first hints of green pushing through the brown earth. No regrets, Hannah agreed. Not a single one. Thank you, Samuel said, turning to look at her with eyes that were still the same storm gray she had fallen in love with all those years ago. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for making winter last, Hannah replied, tears in her eyes. Thank you for giving me time to find my way home. Samuel passed away peacefully a week later in his sleep, with Hannah beside him holding his hand. The valley mourned the loss of a good man, and the funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains and the valley spread below. Hannah grieved deeply, but she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support, and the community rallied around her the way it had rallied around so many over the years. She continued to live at the ranch, refusing to move into town even when her children worried about her being alone. "I'm not alone," she told them. "I'm surrounded by memories, by love, by everything Samuel and I built together. This is my home." She lived 5 more years, long enough to see great-grandchildren born and to know that the legacy she and Samuel had created would continue. She taught her grandchildren to read and told them stories about the old days, about arriving in Montana on a winter night and meeting a rancher who had been determined to make her stay. "He made winter last," she would tell them, her eyes distant with memory. "He gave me time to fall in love, and I never left." Hannah Barrett Oakley died on a snowy morning in December, 91 years old and surrounded by family. They buried her next to Samuel on the hill, and her headstone read, "Beloved wife, mother, teacher, and friend." She said she would only stay until spring, but love made her home. The ranch continued to thrive under Tommy's care and later his son's. The school remained a cornerstone of the community, with Hannah's granddaughter taking over when Sarah retired. The valley grew and changed, welcoming new families while honoring the old, and the story of Hannah and Samuel became part of the local lore. Parents would tell their children about the teacher who came west planning to leave but stayed because of love, about the rancher who made winter last as long as he could to give them time, about a marriage built on respect and support and absolute devotion that lasted 40 years and inspired generations. On the hill above the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Below, the valley spread out in all its beauty, cycling through seasons just as it always had, just as it always would. Winter to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall, and back to winter again. But for Hannah and Samuel, there had been only one season that mattered, one long, beautiful winter that had lasted just long enough for 2 hearts to find each other and decide to stay together forever. It had been more than enough. It had been everything.